Hello, welcome to Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. That's Nelle, I'm Scott, and today we're going to review a book. Nelle, what are we reviewing?
I think we're going to do more than review this book. So this is The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. I just want to talk about the structure of this video a little bit in case you have read it or have not read it. First we're going to talk about our first impressions. Then Scott is going to give us all a bit of a science lesson, which will be helpful for you if you have not read it. And may enrich your experience if you have already read this book. Once Scott is done with his, what I'm sure will be epic explanation of the science, I have not brought home a whiteboard for him, but maybe I should have.
You'll all need to install PowerPoint on your YouTube.
We should get you like a pointer.
Yeah, a laser pointer.
Not a laser, like an actual stick.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, once that's done, then we might get into some spoiler type discussion of our impressions of the book.
Definitely want to discuss this book.
Yes, and I haven't.
And there's so many things that would be a spoiler in this that we can't do it without that. So we're gonna.
So we'll put a big screen up when the spoilers begin, and once the spoilers begin, we're not going back into no spoiler territory, I don't believe. So if you haven't read it, just go and pick it up as soon as that happens.
Alright, so The Watchmaker of Filigree Street is a real genre-bending novel, isn't it? It's historical fiction, come sci-fi, come fantasy, come almost a heist, but not really.
It's good. I don't like things that fit neatly into boxes, and this does not fit neatly into a box. I do like things that are hilarious, and this is hilarious.
It's very witty, isn't it?
It is very witty, and it's just joyful.
It doesn't take itself seriously. That is one thing.
No, it doesn't. It's I found myself pulled out of the narrative quite regularly and thinking about what the author was doing, but in sort of a pleasant way, not in a disruptive to the story way. I keep fondling it because the cover feels very nice, and
it's got this lovely cover. See the clock? And look, it's a map.
It's very nice. Everyone who talks about this book talks about the clock or your octopus, because I feel like it's one of the few things that you can share that gives the tone of the book
like
without
Dobby.
being a spoiler. It's like Dobby.
It's like Dobby. Everybody
it's got a little bit of the spirit of the book.
It didn't have like the biggest role, but it was kind of cool. And look, it's even the octopuses on the front. I don't.
Anyway, I read this and raved about it until my husband picked it up and he read it. Are you going to give it stars?
Well, I gave it some stars on my Goodreads, and I feel like you may disagree with me and call me a mean asshole because I gave it 4.
Yeah, if I gave stars, I would be giving it all the stars. It would get 72 stars.
70. It's raining stars.
It's raining stars. I really loved this book. It was one of the best things I have ever read, ever.
That's really high recommendations, isn't it?
It was so fun, and it was compelling, and I just enjoyed it from cover to cover, and it wasn't meringue, it wasn't light and nothingy.
Yeah. I absolutely enjoyed it too. I actually suspect that this is one of these books. It feels really light on, and I think as you've finished reading it and you think about it more, that you put more together. Do you know what I mean? It's just
so much, and I think one of the things that a lot of people will miss in it, which I knew when I was reading it because I'm married to you, and therefore
I've bored you with this before.
I know more about physics than most non-physics students know. The science in it it's wrong science, but we used to think it was correct. I think knowing that made my enjoyment of the book more so, and that's one of the reasons why I do want to get into the science.
It's really interesting because what Natasha Pulley does in this novel is she basically makes you like all of her characters. All of her characters are immensely likable, particularly Maury is super likable, and you're never allowed to trust him. You're not even sure which side he's on, you know, the whole time. And
I feel that way about, like, all of them.
Yes. and they do this thing where they're like, oh, there's this experiment we can do to determine whether Maury's good or evil. But they do this experiment, and the experiment is based on all of this science that is not true.
But at the time that this book is set, it was still thought to be true. Like, in our reality, at this time, which is the 1890s, it was not. It was still the prevalent theory of how light travelled. Is what it is. She's so smart. You know, we talk about Donna Tartt and all her research and how good that is. This is the same thing. Like, she's got discussions of Japanese culture within Victorian England as it would have been in the period. Her historical representation of Victorian England felt so real to me, and I picked up a book that was non-fiction about Victorian poor women in Victorian London. I put that down to pick this up, and it felt like the scenery was seamless. Like,
so you were reading the 5.
I was reading the 5, and I put that, and I didn't finish it. I put it down to pick this up, and she really has captured the feel really well, and then the science stuff is true in a not true way.
It's really, because the other thing I was always questioning is because, you know, you've got Maury building a clockwork octopus that can move of its own free will and is basically his pet.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, well, this science is not true, but clearly this world is not quite our world. It's, you know, it's almost a steampunk-esque sort of novel.
Yeah, are they going to run with what if this science was real?
Exactly. And I was good with that being the world, like...
Yeah.
But it just left it in this weird state of...
Yeah.
Like Schrodinger's cat.
Yes.
And now I've observed it and it's still Schrodinger's cat. I'm very confused.
But the whole book's a bit Schrodinger's cat as well.
It is.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's starting to get into the science. Is there anything else you want to say before we do get into that?
Look, Nelle said it's one of the best books she's ever read, but I would say I could not understand anybody saying bad things about this book. It might not be the best book you've ever read, but it's like Harry Potter. Everybody liked Harry Potter. It had that sort of feel that it was a great world, it was whimsical, it was fun, and it had a bit more to it.
I definitely felt it had, when I first started reading it and I hadn't finished it yet, I compared it to The Folk in the Faraway Tree when I was talking about it.
Well, it's way more in-depth than that, though.
It is, but it had that same... When I was like 6 or 7 and I used to sit down and read The Folk in the Faraway Tree, it used to like really pull me in. I knew the characters, I loved the characters, and you just like get sucked into see what their adventure was each chapter, you know, because you'd read it a chapter at a time or whatever. And I felt that same sense of like a real excitement for the adventure with familiar characters, even right from the beginning with this. And I think that's how I would explain the feel of it. All right.
So let's go into the science that is actually in this book and explain that. There are a few experiments in physics. In fact, I can probably only think of one experiment in physics that is iconic as the Michelson and Morley interferometry experiment, which is the experiment that Grace is doing during the book, if you've already read it. So the background is that people weren't sure in the 1800s if light was a particle or a wave. And if you have a wave, it needs some sort of medium to move in. If you think of waves in the ocean, they're moving in the medium of water. Sound waves work by compressing and refracting air, basically putting air particles closer together and moving them further apart, and that is a wave.
So the medium is air.
The medium is air, right? And light could travel everywhere, right? So the medium that it's traveling in had to be everywhere. And so they came up with this thing.
And it can't be air because it travels through space.
Because it travels through space. It can travel through a vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? So if it can travel through a vacuum, it has to be, it's a bit weird already, yeah?
Yeah.
So they came up with this thing called ether. So light worked by contracting and refracting ether, by making it condense.
Yes. But other than the fact that light travelled through it, there was no description or proof that ether even existed.
No. It was sort of there, it was evidenced there by, like, it had to be there, like,
it was essential to our understanding of how light moved.
Yeah, and there's so many things like that in physics, like things like brain work. Dark matter is a great example. We can't observe dark matter by its very nature because it is dark matter, but we know that it has to be there because it has an effect on the universe.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the same thing with ether. Right? Now, the Earth is moving around the sun and it's traveling, right? So when you have light on the Earth, it's actually moving in this ether, right? So the interferometry experiment works by splitting a light beam and having it reform and creating an interference pattern. When waves collide, they create an interference pattern.
Like a...
Yeah, so like a circle and a circle. Like
no, I want to say like a... you drown in it. In water.
A rip.
A rip.
Yes, yeah, so that's a very confusing example of it. It's not very simple. Why do you have to pick the hard real life ones? Yeah, but essentially it'll create an interference pattern, which is basically, for light, it'll be light spots and dark spots, right? As opposed to if you just turn a light on and the whole room is light.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So it should create this interference pattern. And it doesn't, right?
Okay.
And they're like, well, what if the ether is moving slower, so we need a bigger interferometry, we need more equipment that can measure things, you know, more subtly and stuff. And what's really weird about this is that there is a solution for this that keeps the ether, right? And that is that light travels at the same speed regardless of the reference frame you're in. So that means that if you're running and looking at light, light is traveling at that speed parallel to you. And if you're standing still, light is still traveling at the same speed parallel to you. Like, it is moving away from you at the same speed regardless of how fast you're going. Right? That is the solution. That is what Einstein discovered as special relativity. Yeah. But this is actually, it's such an iconic experiment that they redo it all the time as soon as they can get bigger experiments or more subtle.
Like when the technology gets better.
Yeah, they're all like, if we reflected off the moon and back. Like, no, they actually did this. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin put this special mirror on the moon so that they could zap a laser beam up there and back.
And do the interferometry experiment again.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, and still nothing.
Yeah, so no ether. But the science that she's doing isn't made up, and the proof that she's trying to prove is something that they're still trying to prove, I guess, in that instance, or endlessly disproving.
Endlessly. The thing is, it's interesting either way. If you can, like, get some mirrors on Alpha Centauri and do the experiment over years and you get that drift, right, and therefore we have ether. That's super interesting. What the hell's that saying about the universe?
Yeah, something.
Exactly. That is saying something about the universe. But basically, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, that's really... I think I've gone into enough depth.
So now we're getting into spoiler territory because I want to say what I think us knowing this reveals about Maury, the character. So if you have not read the book and you don't want spoilers, stop watching now. Spoiler! What I think is really interesting is because we know that Maury is clairvoyant and this time period is actually quite close to when they begin in history to disprove this ether theory.
It's about 40 years beforehand.
So it's still sort of potentially within his scope of knowledge, I guess, of his clairvoyance. It's quite likely that he knows that Grace's experiment will never succeed. And so when she asks him for his help, I feel like his refusal goes from him being terse and not liking her to him not wanting to crush her life's work and kill her dreams.
So you think it's a kindness?
I feel like it's a kindness. And I felt like because I knew that this was real science that had been disproven, that's what I felt like he was doing when I read that part of the book. I felt like he was being kind to her in the way she doesn't need to know that this isn't a thing. It's not something that's gonna, you know?
Yeah. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think Maury generally acts quite kindly in this whole thing.
Yes.
But one of the things is when he's playing poker, he's like, I don't want to play poker, it bores me. And he's like, I don't want to do your experiment, it bores me. It was the same, it was a repeat.
It was a repeat, and it definitely gave it some truth, and I don't necessarily think that wasn't a factor. And what I'm saying is totally my interpretation, and I don't know whether that's something Natasha Pulley intended for the character, but it was definitely how I interpreted it, knowing what I know about the science.
Yeah. Now, let's move away from the science and discuss the other thing that was in the book that you remember.
So, the final sort of, well, not the final bit, but towards the end of the book.
The couple, the love story.
The love story. The love story I did not anticipate.
So, spoilers, turn it off if you haven't watched it.
Yeah, we're already well into that territory.
We are.
So
I was reading and I was just like, oh, they're doing that. And you were like, oh.
I didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming at all until he didn't, and until he slept on the couch on his wedding night, I guess, until he wasn't into Grace.
And see, I interpreted that as some sort of weird chivalric honor thing.
It didn't signpost it for me, but it raised it as a possibility. And then it happened, and I really thought there were so many intimate descriptions of each other. And the grief that Maury had when he lost that future.
Yeah.
Like, there was...
It was interesting, Maury's description of Thaniel to everybody was as a friend repetitively. But that's actually what he would have said in those times to discuss his...
Yeah, for sure. I felt like she revealed to me that I don't... that I assume heterosexuality. And that I assume books are going to be about heterosexuality. And that I'm not as open to that being a possibility in a plot or a story, or unless it's, you know, a queer book or whatever. This wasn't pitched to me as a queer book.
It's certainly not a queer book, except for that one queer scene, you know?
And totally how life should be. Like, that is how queer representation should happen, is it's just
a love story in a book that it's not a love story.
Exactly. And it really shocked me about myself. What I learnt about myself by reading this book really shocked me. And I think that's, for me, why it's so many stars. Because it taught me that I have to be better. It demonstrated to me my own biases. And I think that we all have biases that we're all unpacking all the time. And I don't think that says anything about me as a human being, whether I'm good or bad or whatever.
You live in a society, you observe the society.
Yeah. Exactly.
The society we live in doesn't represent...
But I think the power to take my privilege and expose it to me and show me where I can do better, that, in a novel, that is power. That is awesome. Incredible.
Yeah. That's excellent. And that's why I liked Dark Emu when I read that the other month.
Yeah,
it did the same thing, but about racism rather than homophobia.
Yeah. Not that I'm
Not that you're homophobic, and not that I was racist.
No,
but
no. But it's about how we see things and how we make room for other people.
yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was really key.
I thought
me.
she did a few things to really mislead you that you really, like, they're really, when you question why they mislead you, are really dumb. Like, the fact that this was a historical fiction set in the late 1800s, you're like, oh, there's no gay people in the late 1800s. They didn't exist until the 70s. What? Like...
No, but I mean, they would have been hiding, and it would have been a big thing about them being hiding. But this novel wasn't about making a big thing about them hiding it. It comes up, you know, it does come up, but it's not the centre of it. The centre of it is who's trying to blow people up, you know, like, and appropriately so.
Yes. The other thing I found interesting is this book has 2 Japanese characters in it, but it is based in London.
Yeah.
And the attitudes towards those 2 characters, in fact, there's a whole Japanese community in it, and the attitudes towards those, I don't know why I said there was 2 Japanese characters. There's a 3rd quite major Japanese character as well.
Heaps, yeah.
But there's a whole Japanese community, and the attitudes towards them, they're being called Chinamen, slanty eyes, and all of this sort of stuff. I found that a bit confronting, and I'm like, well, that's what they would have been saying back then. It was very accurate to the insult. They weren't even using those terms as insults either.
No, much more casual than, like, descriptors almost.
And I thought that Natasha Pulley was quite nuanced in her use of that, because it's clearly inappropriate to call somebody from Japan a Chinaman.
But can I tell you, my grandfather used to do it all the time. Like, anyone from any part of Asia was a Chinaman. The handling of Grace and her casting off of traditional gender, not just expectations, but like everything.
Yes.
That was awesome. That was awesome, because it wasn't a big, like, it was a big deal, but
I loved the Grace character. That she was my favourite character in the book, and I don't feel like that she was yours.
No, she wasn't mine.
But I loved the thing she says early on. She repeats it quite a few times, and even Nathaniel repeats it to her dad at one point. When the sign says, "Don't walk on the grass, one hops."
Yes.
That sort of summed up her character really nicely for me. Like,
yes, she was, but she was a bit vindictive towards Maury, and that really upset me.
She was quite Machiavellian. She was actually the character of Grace. She was science without ethics. She wanted to know the answer so much that she didn't care who she stomped on.
Oh, that's a really interesting interpretation, and makes me want to go back and look at the ethical balance of everyone, particularly with respect to their occupation. Because I guess the other unethical person with respect to his occupation is the bomber.
Yes.
So I wonder if that's a...
You know, as much as this...
throughout the book.
As much as this is about finding the bomber, it's so not what I think. I actually struggled to think of who the bomber was, you know, like, I mean, I don't, but...
No, because for me it wasn't about finding the bomber. For me it was about finding a basis for trust, you know, within relationships, where in situations where trust had no way to exist.
I was actually wondering if we'll even find out who the bomber was when we're getting towards the end, and I was like, oh, she's got a bit to wrap up, and there's not many pages left here.
Yeah, but she got it in.
But if you've not put it on your TBR yet and you're at this stage, why the hell did you watch all those spoilers?
But tell us what you think about it. If you're wanting to have a spoiler-filled conversation and you don't necessarily want to do it in the comments, message us on Instagram or send us an email.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot, and remember, ideas are more powerful. They're more powerful than unexpected
Clockwork octopuses.
octopi.
Okay.
I can't believe she bombed Katsu.